All right, thank you for listening to this podcast. This episode of Literally is sponsored by Lexicon and Line. Case, tell us a little something about Lexicon and Line.
Lexicon and Line, it does three things. They are communications consultants. They teach professional business writing and speaking courses, and they are research and data evaluation experts.
And you can find everything about Lexicon and Line at lexicononline.com. Please give them a visit, and thank you so much for sponsoring this podcast, Lexicon and Line.
This is Case Johnston. This is the Literally Podcast. We're talking with Sharon Harrigan today about her debut novel, Half, in Banyan 1 at the Monarch in Ogden, Utah. Where right down the road we have a wonderful corner filled with Black Lives Matters protests going on, peacefully yelling, screaming, having a voice in the community in Ogden has just been really, really wonderful in that way. So today we're talking with Sharon Harrigan. The first time we've done a second author. I mean, we've done Sean Davis, but
does he count?
Sean doesn't count because we weren't talking about books. We just were talking about like life, Bigfoot and stuff. Yeah. But this is the second time we've had an author come on for the second time, and we're excited that it's Sharon. In a little bit of background too is with Sharon's last podcast, I use that podcast in all of my classes. For Southern New Hampshire, for the graduate program, for creative nonfiction, for the advanced memoir program, I use Sharon's last podcast as instruction, and students really, really love it because of what we were able to do there. So no pressure this time, Sharon. I don't teach a novel class, so there's no way I can do it.
Yeah, I'm honored to be the author who comes two times. Thank you so much for having me.
We're so glad to have you back. So first off, today's actually, it's June 9th. It's Half, the title of the novel. It's book birthday. So it's the official publishing day. How does it feel to have the book come out today? I mean, it's exciting. It's wonderful. But at the same time, as we were talking just briefly, with COVID and with the Black Lives Matters movement and with our country and unrest, you and other authors have, I know, worried about having a book birthday during this time.
Yeah, it feels kind of miraculous, frankly, that it has happened at all. So I'm really grateful. There have been so many obstacles for all of us who have been trying to publish during the pandemic, and then but even those, it seemed like they were manageable. Those were like logistical problems. Mm-hmm. Logistical problems like not knowing if the warehouse was going to be open because of quarantine, and whether the printer would be allowed to send the books to the warehouse, those kind of problems. But then what happened with the murder of George Floyd, it was beyond logistical problems. It was a spiritual, moral mm-hmm. crisis. And I think we were all feeling grief and anger. And we were all, I've been to some protests, as you said, there are protests going on right now where you are. And it just seemed like that was eclipsing everything else. Just, I think our mood was really not celebratory. Yeah. And so as recently as a week ago, I was wondering if I was really going to announce that my book was launching this week. Would it be appropriate? Would it be respectful? Would it be the right thing to do? And so kind of at the last minute, I decided that after this weekend and seeing some change happening, we're in Virginia, the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond is going to come down, I think, tomorrow. Mm-hmm. There's systemic change that seems like it's going to be happening in police reform. And so I don't know, the mood seems to be one of more of hope. And so it feels like it's okay to add my art to this, to add it all to the mix. I don't know. There is no right or wrong thing to do. And I know some authors are choosing to postpone. But it felt like I could, I don't know, be part of the conversation. And so I decided to send an email and to post about my book launch today. And but it's still, you know, it's a very fraught time to be alive, and so yes, it's a very emotional, kind of bittersweet moment.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think because I think the last time we talked was probably a week ago, and you were still really hesitant about what to do today. And when I saw your post on Facebook and then with the email today, I was really happy. You know, I feel like in the same way that, you know, after this weekend with the police, not only with the one police officer being arrested, but the three other officers being arrested, I feel like that shows that they're, you know, we are. I hope that we're on an upward swing of looking at these really hard, difficult times that have happened. And I was happy to see that your book that you said it's out there, you know. And I think we need the arts. But I think you're absolutely right. I think a week ago would have been different. I really do. I think a week ago would have been different. But today, it felt good to really see your email come out and to see that the book was out and to see people to rally and say, yeah, this is a good thing that people are writing and they're sharing and their books are coming out. And so I was really just happy to see it. And I'm here's my little teeny Corona bottle.
I'll toast you.
Yeah, cheers. Let's talk about the book some. You know, I mean, we can talk about writing later. I mean, for sure, especially during this time with Corona and with Corona or with COVID and with the unrest. But let's talk about the book, because I absolutely loved it. I felt like, and I made a note directly. And so, firstly, the title of the book is Half, and it's from the University of Wisconsin Press, and it's a beautiful cover. Nobody can really see this, but you can, right? You've seen this, and Brandon will take photos of it, of course. But it's a beautiful book, and I didn't know, you know, it's a book about twins. It's about two very, very close twins and this kind of magic between them, or what happens between these two bodies that feel as one throughout the entire book, well, almost throughout the entire book, and how this kind of almost shared consciousness between the two of them as they grow up and as they deal with a father who is obviously like the sun in their universe, but at the same time he burns them in so many ways, just like the sun might do that.
I love how you put that.
I mean, he does. He shines so bright, but they don't want that. And so this is a book about the growth of these two young women, and then the death of their father. And throughout the book, and I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler for you, but throughout the book they say, "We killed our dad," and this is from the very beginning. And so the reader is intrigued from the very beginning to find out how. Sharon can open up about all of that, what she wants to. But let's talk a little bit about the journey. This book started, the journey of this book started in 2012, right?
Well, the novel grew out of a story. So the story, I actually wrote the story at the final semester of my MFA, and I read it in my MFA thesis reading. So that was in 2012, and then the story was published in 2013, and after that I wrote a memoir and published a memoir.
Right.
But then I was still intrigued by this story and decided to try to grow it into a novel. So yeah, it's been with me for a long time, and it's evolved in a lot of ways. But the thing that it started with was the we voice. That's like it really wouldn't have existed at all without this idea of two people who exist as one, and that kind of fed everything else. Like how can that happen, and what does it mean? Because it's unsustainable, right? You know, it's going to break. How is it going to break? How are they going to actually stop repressing their differences, because they're not actually, as you find out, spoiler, the end, exactly the same.
Right.
And I know when my teenage daughter read it, people have had different responses to that rupture. And her response was like, oh, it felt like a relief. Finally, they didn't have to like pretend to be so different, like to be the same. They could finally like be themselves. And like her response as a teenager was kind of like, yeah, like teenagers are so under so much pressure to conform and be the same. And then like when you can finally be yourself, what a relief.
Yeah.
So that's like what it felt like for her. So it didn't feel like this tragic thing. It felt like, phew, happy ending.
Yeah. Well, it was subtle too. It was a subtle chapter, and I it's in the book, but I noted it because all of a sudden, and it wasn't this huge kind of fault line that happened between them. All of a sudden, within a later chapter in the book, we get names. All of us after 3/4 of the book, we get it's always we. It's that plural first person pronoun of we throughout the book, and then all of a sudden we get a name. And I noticed it, but, you know, all of a sudden I was like, what these are names? What these? And then I had to like put it together. I was like, okay. And the next chapter switched, and it was shared points of views basically from there on out, every other chapter. But it wasn't this huge rift. It wasn't this break in the cosmos part of the book. It was this subtle moment.
It happens gradually.
Right. Yeah. It was all of a sudden finally they're using their own names, and they're becoming different people. And it was and then the rest of the book, we see a lot more of these two very different personalities that have shifted away from each other from their early 20s to their late 20s, and they've become these different people. And then all of a sudden, by the time you get to spoiler alert, I'm sorry everybody, but you should read the book. By the time you get to the end of the book, there are these two very distinct voices that if you go back, you can see those voices within the within the dialogue, but they're just speaking almost together. That's the way I felt, and I thought it was. I really loved how it was subtle. It was, we've moved away from each other, and then there's a name. It wasn't this opening of saying, "Oh, now we're different people," you know.
Yeah. I hoped that it would that the collective the narrator would kind of disappear before your eyes, but then all of a sudden you'd have different narrators, and you'd continue on the journey with them. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like when I talk about it, like a very conceptual thing, like a very kind of intellectual thing, but it also, to me, it felt as I was writing it a very emotional thing too.
Yeah, I can see that, and getting towards the end of it, like I said, those voices kind of really came to the forefront separately, but then also. And this was what got me towards the last 4 or 5 chapters. What sucked me in was the mom's voice. All of a sudden, it was just this voice that had been seen as kind of weak throughout the entire book, and then the last few chapters, her voice was really, really strong. At the same time, it kind of served as this almost debunking of all of these things that the young women believed about their father throughout. And I mean, it felt like obviously that she was rationalizing, and that she felt like, okay, well, she's just kind of, she had to live her life, and she had to deal with all of these things herself. And so she was able to, you know what I mean, soften it, and defend him, and the father in the book. And so, am I giving too much away?
No, not yet, but be careful that you might.
Okay. No, I won't. I won't go there.
There's a whole murder mystery. Don't give away.
Right. No, I won't do that.
The ending for that.
But throughout the book, the girls have said, "We killed our dad." Just in parallel to, he said he killed his own father. And so, which brings me to the one question I had: is this book, to me, I mean, it's titled Half, but I mean, there's so much shame in this book. I felt like, there's a large theme in this book, is I felt like just the theme of feeling shame for a life that you lived. Is that Is that something that, like you said, was conceptual, or was something that, like you said, was emotional?
Yeah, I guess what interested me was like this moment in the end when they come together as adults at the funeral, and they talk about things that they never talked about before. But as small children, because the book opens when they're 5 years old, they had these experiences that were so vivid to them, and they kind of started to believe things that, they continued to believe even as they got old enough to like actually have more subtle kind of experience of the world. They still had these visceral reactions to things they experienced when they were young, and they didn't question them. And so yeah, so there's so much that's unspoken, and a lot of that is shame, right? And they don't speak about it because of the shame. So it kind of, it's an organic moment, I think, at a funeral. It often does happen that people talk about things that they don't normally talk about, and they review someone's life, and they review their own life, and they review what they wish they had said to the person who died. And so to me, it did seem like something that really does happen to people. And you realize it's kind of too late now to talk to the person who's died. Yeah. And there's this reckoning that happens. And it hasn't happened to me that way, but I've known people who've had that experience. I think it can be very powerful. Yeah, I was kind of trying to show that we make these assumptions often and we don't question them. And sometimes we make these assumptions when we're small children and we carry them through our adulthood. And it's really, I think at the end, I'm hoping that there's a lot of surprise for the reader, but there's a lot of surprise for the characters too, as they actually realize that things were not as they thought they were.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I'm thinking about it, and going back to the mom, she kind of deflects or combats all of those things that they believed throughout their lives towards the end. Like everything they say, well, she says, well, that's not absolutely true. Well, that's not the way it was. And so, and coming from writing your memoir before this, do you think that having been, being a memoirist, do you think that kind of looking at how it is to be a memoirist in the way that everybody sees something differently, and it always surprises you later that they saw it completely differently, played into the writing of those last 5 or 6 chapters?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the book that inspired me to write this book was We the Animals by Justin Torres. And I remember reading, it's in the We voice, and it's short and lyrical. But one of the things that really struck me was that he kind of melds these 3 genres. It feels like fiction, and it feels like poetry, and it feels like memoir. I'm not saying it is memoir, but it has that intimacy, right? And I read that and thought, like, oh, those are my genres. Like, I love like the melding of those 3 things. Right. And I wanted to kind of do that too. And so using this this sort of retrospective voice that you use in memoir, and kind of putting that in fiction. And in my memoir, I was talking to people about my dad who is no longer alive, and there was this reckoning that was going on too. So yeah, I definitely, I feel like it's so fluid, the whole, for me at least, the jumps between different genres.
Yeah, I do too. And I think, but having read a lot of fiction and memoirs, I think you can kind of see the blending of that nonfiction voice in fiction when it happens. I think a lot of times with fiction, you don't get that retrospective writer at the desk reflection like you do in this book. Because they are really looking back at their lives throughout, because we start at the funeral pretty early on in the book. We recognize
on page 1.
Yeah. And so it's like, it is a memoir shape in that sense.
It's a memoir shape. Exactly.
And that's true. I think you can see that, which I love books like that, but of course, I love reading nonfiction. But yeah, it was an easy read, and it's an easy read for me, as you know, means that I get through it really quickly, and that I enjoy it. I enjoy the heck out of it. I love the characters.
Well, the best thing that people say to me that I love is when they say like they read it fast.
Yeah.
Like it was a fast read. I take that as a compliment.
It's a huge compliment, especially for me, who's I take forever to read anything.
Me too.
You know, I really, really do. And I don't know what it is. I'm a very slow reader, but if I can read a book like yours very quickly, and even though I took a 2-month break because of moving and it got lost in a box, when I was reading it, it went really, really quickly. But this is something too, and this is probably, I'm guessing that your daughter helped you with this, but it scares me to death to write a novel now in the present time with social media, that includes social media, that includes cell phones, that includes all of these things. I don't know if I ever will because it scares me to death. How was that? Is that something that you embraced, or was that something that because you had an expert like your daughter to help you with, that you were willing to jump into?
Yeah, well, I so much wanted to write about contemporary youth culture that I set the frame 10 years in the future to be able to do that, because I have these adults looking back, and I wanted them to be like in college now. So that was a bit of a logistical problem, and so I thought, well, I'll just have them be adults 10 years from now, and then they can be in college now. And I think I was really, my daughter's a writer too. And so we talk books a lot, and I kind of wanted to write about these issues that she was talking about all the time. I wanted to write about, what she's experiencing as being a young and female, and feeling the power and terror of that, of being, objectified, but also everything being so vivid, and YouTube, and just like the way that things get broadcast so easily, and they can go viral so easily. So yeah, it's tricky, and I did ask her to read things. I would say like, did I get it right? And she'd tell me if I did or didn't, and I'd make changes. I'm still, I was still nervous, like, for her to read the latest version, but and things are changing every day. Like, you get it right today, next week it's going to be wrong.
Right. Like, you didn't have TikTok in there, and TikTok is, it's like,
not only that, I don't have the pandemic in there, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm scared to death of writing about any characters where social media and cell phones exist, because I think around every corner I would wonder, well, why didn't they just text somebody? But within your book, you embraced it, and there were texts, and there was Facebook, and there was YouTube, and there was these things that these young women had to deal with that shaped their lives. Things on social media, especially YouTube, shaped their teenage lives, and who they were as an adult, and how their father dealt with their social media, YouTube life, and what he thought of that, and how he was able to, eventually help them in a way. I don't know if they wanted it, but he did what he did, and you embraced it. And I mean, it's good. Like, my son's only 9, so there's no way he could correct me. But I'm guessing it's really,
I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
I bet he could.
That's true. But it was embraced, and I thought it was done well.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. I wrote an essay for LitHub that's coming out in a few days about the first person plural voice, and so it's a reading list of 10 books that use it. And one of them is this great book by Sarah Bannon called Weightless. It came out about 5 years ago, in which the we voice is the high school girl, the girls in a high school who all know this girl who ends up killing herself. But anyway, I was reviewing it to write this essay, and they're all communicating on Facebook. And what's funny is, like, maybe 5 years ago, like teenagers did, now like Facebook is for old people.
It is, yeah.
So shit's out of date. It would be Instagram, but it's still a good book.
Right. And you can't worry about that either. Because you can't imagine what's going to be next, unless you really imagine. Like, unless you're like a sci-fi author, and you can really imagine what is going to be the next big thing that changes all of this stuff. Because you're able to get it wrong if you go big. If you're able to say, well, we're able to just talk to each other via, thoughts, then you're like,
well,
oh.
that's what I did in my book. They read each other's minds.
Well, right, but I mean, that was magical. That was like shared consciousness of human beings. Because twins have said that, right? Twins have said that they feel this kind of shared consciousness. But I mean, when it comes to technology, there's no way you could predict anything. Nobody could predict TikTok, or that I watch TikTok. I'm addicted to TikTok. I mean, I never thought I would be, and it was the pandemic, and I got on there, and then all of a sudden I'm like, my phone's telling me I spent 22 hours on TikTok today, and I'm like, well, I could have been writing.
Writing the next TikTok novel.
Writing the next TikTok
probably
novel.
the best thing I've ever heard.
Oh, I'm
You're
addicted
to TikTok.
But you know how quickly it knows your preferences. So it's a lot of a lot of it is like dancing young women and young men, but all of a sudden now I only get is political feeds. The only thing I get on my TikTok now is like political feeds, updates on coronavirus. I mean, it's smart. With just a couple likes, all of a sudden it knows exactly who I am. Anyways, that's off topic. So with this, with Half, what part of it was the actual short story? What was the impetus of?
Yeah, so the ending and the beginning are pretty much the same.
Oh, okay.
It's the middle that changed, like the 275 pages.
Right. So it was basically the full narrative arc, minus kind of all of the
the short story is the scene when they're 5, and then the scene at the funeral when the voice breaks into 2 eyes, and then there's a middle part which is sort of just this summary about their adolescence. So I took that summary about their adolescence, which in the story is like 3 pages, and I multiplied it by 100.
Was that difficult, or did you find that pretty easy?
Yeah, that was really hard. I don't advise it.
Really? Yeah.
The middles are hard.
Middles are hard. What part do you think was the biggest struggle? I mean, for the middle part, was it?
Well, so the structure, I'm not sure if it's apparent. I mean, it probably doesn't need to be apparent. The structure is that each chapter is 1 year in the girls' lives. So it starts out the first chapter they're 5, the second chapter they're 6, etc. And so I was kind of moving along, and that worked for me. And that's and then I got to the end of it, and it was kind of too episodic. So I had to come up with a backbone to connect them all, and so they're all like moving towards one common end of story. So I think that was the hardest part for me, is to move it from, it still is episodic, but the episodes all build towards this, I think, really hopefully cohesive ending.
Was that something that you like? Was that something that came after the first draft?
That came after like the 4th draft.
What did you do to make that kind of craft change, or feeling, or tone, or plot?
Yeah,
shift?
well, I took a workshop at the VQR Summer Conference, sponsored by the Virginia Quarterly Review, and I took a workshop with Brett Anthony Johnson, and he really kind of helped me puzzle it out. He helped me figure, because I was thinking like, oh, well, it is episodic. How do I have to like completely start over? And he said, no, you just have to give it a backbone. And so that really was a game changer for me. Like, you can actually have it be these, here's age 5, here's age 6, here's age 7, and then you can kind of insert a through line, kind of overlay, superseded over that.
Sure.
And so now I know.
Yeah.
Now it seems apparent, but it was something I struggled with.
Were these large insertions, or were they just like every chapter you could put a line in that kind of tied it to the next one, or were there some chapters that were inserted in between the episodes?
Yeah, well, I have these sort of interstitial chapters, which is the frame is that there are these 30-year-old twins. They're at the funeral and they're looking back.
Right.
And so I inserted, and that's a prologue. And then I insert these very short, like 1-page chapters, like every couple chapters. And I show them as adults trying to analyzing what they just reviewed together, which is their childhood. And so that was the backbone that I added on later.
Yeah. And
the retrospective voice, that's what I added.
Right. And so that, so for people young, I always say young, and I never should say young, budding writers, if they get this kind of review that says it just feels episodic, I think the lesson here is that you can go back and you can shift tone and you can shift theme and you can shift plot to tie everything together.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you don't have to start from scratch. You can just build on what you have.
Yeah. I think it's great. I think I need that lesson, because novels are hard. Novels are hard. I think memoirs are harder, but I think novels are hard. But you know me, I have that bias. But
memoirs are harder.
They
for
are,
sure.
and I've written both. I've written both, and it seems with novels, when I jump in, I almost always enjoy writing. With memoirs, it's not always that same way. It seems like it can be a gut-wrenching, life-changing, emotional journey into who I am as a person. And novels, they don't necessarily put writers through that same type of experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And I think it's good that we're memoirists first, because we got, we kind of beat the crap out of ourselves, and then we can go and write novels and enjoy it,
Exactly.
Yeah. We've gone through the hard stuff. So with this book, this is my last question. And you can share anything you want, after that, obviously. With this book, when it came to overall, you noted that you knew the end and you knew the beginning. When it came to overall plotting, what was your technique, or what was your kind of goal, or was this more of, I know the end and I know the beginning, now I'm going to flesh out these characters so they become more rich?
Yeah, well, what I wanted, so I put in this I added this frame, right? The retrospective voice, the girls as adults looking back. And then what I wanted them, as they're looking back, to not just find what the reader would expect or what they would expect. I wanted them to have revelations, epiphanies,
Yes.
surprises. And so then I had to kind of really dig deep to figure out what those epiphanies, what those surprises might be. And so I guess that's how I figured out the plot. Is like, so what are they going to find, and what is it going to mean, and how is this going to be different than what they thought it would be, and how is this going to change them? And are they going to both agree about this? Are they going to have the same epiphany? If not, how is that going to affect their relationship?
Right.
And so,
which all comes to an end in the last,
yeah,
all those questions get answered within the last five chapters.
And that was kind of my approach in my memoir. Was when people say, how did you know when you were done? I would say, well, I had these questions at the beginning, and I knew I was done when I got the questions answered. So maybe the novel is in a similar kind of way too. I had these questions like, how are they going to find these things out, and what surprises are going to be uncovered, and how are they going to deal with those?
Right.
So yeah, it's making it sound like more and more like I use the same technique with my memoirs, with my novel. It's just funny.
Well, I think it's great. And the thing is too and I keep going back. In my brain, when I finished the book, I kept going back to the mom, and so they have these expectations, they have these beliefs that they have created throughout their lives that they've stuck to together. And then I think that the mom does a really good job of kind of, well, just like in memoir, being the voice of, you guys don't really know what you're talking about, or deflecting, or saying you don't know everything. And that in the end kind of, in my mind, blows up all of these kind of myths that they've created throughout their lives. And even if, as the reader, we can see what the mom is actually doing for herself to protect herself, that she does give all of the sliver of doubt that kind of leads us through the last part of the book, where we kind of say, what is real. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I really do hope that readers read this and it makes them think about their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, what myths have I carried through? What beliefs have I carried through in my life? What assumptions? What like feelings of superiority that I know more than somebody else?
Sure.
And what these things that I'm doing of like, making these decisions about not speaking to so and so or not doing this or holding the high ground. Like, at what cost is that going to be?
Yeah.
And is it worth it? And are you going to have regret?
Are you going to have shame? Which it goes back to. I mean, where does your driving shame in life come from?
Right.
And I think as memoirists we have to answer that question. But I think the novel does a really good job of answering that for the protagonists at the end, and then you leave the book and you think, I don't know, it felt so real and authentic to, like what you said, when a life ends and how everybody has to deal with it differently.
And maybe readers will think, oh, maybe I'll ask these questions now while this person's still alive, instead of until it's too late.
Right, which is so hard. I mean, but that's one of the things. But it's a key common part of our humanity that we don't. We don't ask. We live our daily lives thinking that someday either it'll disappear from our consciousness or we won't ask and everything will be just fine. So I mean this book really touches on that kind of part of our humanity that says we always have enough time, and we really don't. And it's great that way. So I'm going to let you, anything else you want to say about the book? Because Brandon's already given me the 5 minutes, because we've been, like I said, the casts are the best when they're wrapped up. We're learning. We're learning. Anything that you want to share about the book, about the pub date, about today, about the journey of the book, or anything for any readers that should pick it up?
I don't know, you read it in a very deep way, and I really appreciate that. I like that you're having an emotional response to it, because sometimes when I talk about it and I say, oh, it was this technical puzzle if I had to use this perspective, and it was like writing a sestina, and it feels very cold, like these technical restrictions, but you make it sound very warm, which is what I hoped it would be. So, it's thrilling to have, now that it's out in the world, to have people reading it and responding to it like this, real thing that is out in the world. So that's, what that's like. It's in your head for so long, and and now it's not just in my head. So it's been really, also I've been happy that people have been responding to it, that it's been easy to read. And I just love to hear that, because it is, I think it does something that no other book I have seen has ever tried to do. There are a lot of other We Voice books, but this one tries to convince readers that two people could speak in one voice. So I was afraid as I was writing it, people are going to think, oh, this is so weird. I haven't seen anything like this before. I don't understand it. But that's not the reception I've been getting so far. I've been getting, like, it was a fast read. Like, so that really is gratifying.
And the reviews have said that. I read about 3 or 4 reviews today, probably. And they all said that the voice was authentic and that it wasn't distracting. And that's what you want. That's great. I mean, if we do this thing that most people don't do, it just flowed. Yeah. So I'm really pleased. I'm really happy that people are reading it, and I'm glad it's in the world, despite all the possible obstacles that have been put in its way with viruses and, recessions and everything. What's going to happen tomorrow? I know. The 2020 memes are really, really funny, but they're also very, very, they're funny because they're very, very true. But thank you so much for talking to us again. Our second guest
I'm so
on the podcast.
Honored. Thank you so much.
Well, your first podcast just has done so much for me. I don't some classes I don't even need to do a lesson plan. I just put the podcast on, and you've made my life easier, so that's a good thing. But thank you so much, Sharon, again. And the book is Half from the University of Wisconsin Press. You can. What's the best way to get it right now? That's a really good question.
Yeah, there are so many delays because of COVID-19. If you go to my website, I have buy links, www.sharonharrigan.net. If you can't get it through a independent bookstore because there's some problems with delivery, you can always order it through the through University of Wisconsin Press, and I have links for that too.
Okay, great. That's perfect. All right. Well, thank you again. This is Case Johnston. This is a Literally podcast. Today we were talking with Sharon Harrigan about her debut novel Half from the University of Wisconsin Press. And thanks again for talking to us.
Thank you, Case.
Bye.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.